and welcome to the NUHS Women in Science and Healthcare, WISH, and NUS Equal Opportunities and Career Development, EOCD, Lunch and Learn series. In this quarter's event, we have a special session with two prominent advocates and role models talking about today's theme, We for She, partnering at work and partnering at home.
Hi, I'm Melina Supaya, and this is my co-host, Swain Chen. We'll start off with brief introductions and comments from our two speakers, then move into a discussion focusing on the inevitable interactions between work and home, particularly as we're physically forced together for many of us over the past 18 months through the pandemic. Our first speaker is Bryan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Fathering Limited and Dads for Life movement in Singapore. He has more than 26 years leadership, management, coaching, and training development experience in the Singapore Armed Forces, public service, and the nonprofit sector. The Center for Fathering is a nonprofit organization founded in 2000 to promote active and involved fathering and to address issues caused by fatherlessness in Singapore. Through the fathering programs and initiatives in the Center for Fathering and the nationwide Dads for Life movement, he hopes to turn the hearts of the children towards their fathers. Bryan, we're very happy to have you join us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Melina and Swain. So I'm just going to
share your screen so that you can share your slides with us. Great, thank you.
Can you see the slides?
Very well.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Melina, Swain, and also Paulin. It's amazing that we are actually celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Women's Charter in Singapore today. It is a charter, it's a legislative act that was passed in 1961 to protect and advance the rights of women and girls in Singapore. And what the role of Dads for Life is in Singapore is really to not just to play a more active role in the lives of our children, but to make sure that we do that in partnership with our wives. We acknowledge that we have a very big role and a great influence on the women in our lives and our children. And that really is what I hope to be sharing a little more today. This is a very quick picture of my family. 4 young kids. I have a good marriage today. Very thankful for that, actually. And we have no helper. So that's where the partnership with my wife comes in really strongly, because as a dual income family today, we realize that we can have it all, but we can't have it all at the same time. And that's something that we kind of need to find a balance with. And why this picture is so precious to me is as recent as 7 years ago, this picture would never have been possible, because in one of the darkest spot of my life, I wanted to be so successful in my career for the sake of the family so that I could be better provide for them. I kind of lost the plot and found myself distancing from the family, from relationships, and pursuing success at a career that could bring bad consequences to the family life that we had. At some point, I was even disillusioned enough to want to walk away from the family just to be good at what I did at work. And I was just fortunate that I had my wife, who managed to talk some sense into me over a long period of time. She continued to be gracious and to stand by me and to allow me to individuate as a son, as a man, as a husband, and to realize the role that I have in the family and the influence that I have. And I'm thankful that also many volunteers from Dads for Life actually started appearing in my life, not just to support me as I understood the role as a dad and as a husband, but to really hold me accountable for the quality of relationships that I have at home. So that has allowed me to have this thriving marriage and a family that I have today. Without the community, without my wife's grace, this would never have happened. And I think this is really the crux of what our two movements, Moms for Life and Dads for Life, is in Singapore. If you look at the logo, It's really about ensuring that all children in Singapore grow up with a mother figure and a father figure in their lives, regardless of the circumstance of the relationship between the couple. And the men need to know, right? Not many men have the good opportunity to have good role models in their life. I certainly didn't. But yet, I'm just glad that there were enough people out there who were willing to walk the journey with me. So this is really the impact of the fathering movement in Singapore over the last 20 years. We have really good men who are willing to invest so much of themselves into other men who might be struggling in their roles as son, brother, man, husband, fathers, and employers like myself. And I'm just glad to be a beneficiary who subsequently became a volunteer, and now I'm actually get to serve as a staff in Center for Fathering. So really, if there's anything I want to leave with you, if you know anyone who might require some support on their parenting journey, please feel free to look us up at this QR code. This is where we provide not just a resource, but also a community for support and accountability. And really to all the women here today, I just want to say that your influence and your role and your grace is important in the lives of the men around you. Without my wife's grace and patience and faith that I could turn around, I would never be able to enjoy the family life that I have today. And I believe I say that on behalf of a lot of the volunteers that we have in our Center for Fathering, That's for Life, where we find men transforming themselves and their families, and even the spheres of influence that they are in once they realize what their influence is in this space. And for the women also, whatever the Women Charter hopes to write, this is where it's not just a woman's problem. The man has a role to play, the man has a voice, and this is what we hope to do, to raise the awareness of why our women need to be protected, need to be provided for, and need to be given dignity. As a dad, I have a role to ensure that my sons are raised to respect women, to honor their moms, and I need to ensure that my daughter grows up knowing how she should be treated, that she has equal opportunities in life, in education, at work, and every space that she's in. And in her marriage, she needs to be honored and to be cherished as a wife. And that's what I find myself having to do every day now, to role model that for my children by being the best husband I could be for my wife. And that doesn't always happen. And even when I fail, I show them what is required to to reconcile, to admit when I'm wrong, and to restore the relationship and the trust within the marriage and the family. So I'm looking forward to have this conversation with the rest of you today. Thank you, and over to you, Melina and Swain.
Thank you very much, Bryan, for this inspiring message. And it's really great to hear personally about how this journey has gone for you. And I'm sure we'll explore that a little bit more as this hour goes on. I'd now like to introduce our second guest. Professor Paulin Straughan is a professor of sociology and dean of students at SMU. She's also the director of the Center for Research on Successful Aging in SMU, which is a center dedicated to finding ways to ensure and improve well-being among the elderly in Singapore's aging society. Her research interests center around sociology of family and medical sociology. She's published in both sociology and medical journals, including Social Science and Medicine, Cancer, and Cancer Causes and Control. She was a nominated member of Parliament from 2009 to 2011, perspectives which we'll be hoping to draw on again during the course of this hour. And during that time, she advocated for work-life balance in a more pro-family social environment. She's been awarded multiple teaching excellence awards from the NUHS during her career in education, and also received the Public Administration Medal in recognition of her work in 2010. So Pauline, can I hand it over to you for some introductory comments? I think you're on mute right now.
Well done. Every week I start off saying, I'm not going to be the one, okay, that's going to be muted. But so this is a new way of engaging with friends across Zoom. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for sharing your lunchtime with me. I stand in awe of people like Bryan, right? Because when I work as an academic, right? When I look at family issues, but when I see volunteers who walk the talk and try so hard to shift the norms governing, how we exercise our everyday life in the family, it's a very, very long, hard journey, isn't it, Bryan? All that effort that goes in, and norms change so slowly. But I've been in this business for a long time, and the norms have shifted. When I started investigating and researching on family matters in the 1990s, it was a very traditional Singapore, right? Where we were so afraid not to clock hours. So I started at NUHS, right? We were very careful. Make sure we rush into the office by 8:30. Turn on your lights, because your lights must be on so that anybody walking down the corridor know that you are there, right? Register your attendance, and then for the rest of the day, try your best, and you don't leave before it's time, because your lights must remain on, right? Much of it was self-policing fear, but much of it was also a very traditional, static work environment that did not appreciate, right, the importance of flexibility in the exercise of family responsibilities. So many of us pushed for that flexibility. Bryan and his amazing team, right, in the various VWOs, academics, even politicians. And so we fought very hard for a 5-day work week. Now we have a 5-day work week. We fought very hard. We continue to fight very hard for flexibility at the workplace. That was a hard fight, because many employers are very fearful that if they don't see us, what are we doing? Are we really working? So, but then God is a very humorous God. So we have COVID, and the pandemic, 24-hour notice. Many of us were thrown back at home. And I know my team, some of them didn't even get to bring their laptops home, right? Because it was so sudden that, we had to give permission subsequently for people to go back and gather their things so that they can function well at home. And now 1.5 years has gone by. Businesses that cannot thrive in a virtual setting where we are allowed to work, as and where, you are able to, they have all died, most of them. The businesses that have thrived have had to learn how to trust their employees, and trust that just because they don't see you, it doesn't mean that you're not working hard to advance, the mission of the office. So I think that we are at the crux of change, and we need to leverage this change. This is where we are able, I think, for those of us, who have been working on this for a long time, I think we're able to shift norms a little bit faster now, right? What we want, for those who are working, very hard at growing families and taking care of domestic responsibilities, what you want is recognition that there is work, real work that has to be done. And that work doesn't necessarily, stand by a very rigid schedule that we have to abide by, especially when you have caregiver for young children and caregiver for aging parents, right? When the care needs are there, you have to be there. So what we want then is flexibility at the workplace, to respect that when we are needed at home, we should be released. And when we are not needed, we can be trusted to revert back to our responsibilities at the workplace. Nonetheless, so the data tells us, right? So I deal with large data sets. Data tells us that men are doing a lot better now, at home. The division of labor is not as stark, as 20, 30 years ago when I first started playing with data. I think men in Singapore have stepped up, especially the younger men, in terms of division of labor, especially in terms of childcare responsibilities. They have come to partner their wives. But there's still a lag, right? Any division of domestic labor data that you look at, be it in Singapore or elsewhere, always shows that women do more, right? Women do more. Men tell us that women do more. Women tell us that they are doing a lot more. So the question sociologically then is why? Why is this the case? Probably a couple of reasons. Some of it, is the power dynamics at home. Who brings in, more cash, right? who is more, whose paycheck is needed to support the family. And therefore, there's this deference of, okay, then you need to spend more time at work so that, I can, spend more time at home and so forth. Part of it, so women don't scold me. Part of it is what we call women's gatekeeping problems, right? We want things to be done in a particular way. And therefore we end up having to do it ourselves. My husband always asks me, didn't I just clean that? And then I'll be going around with the cloth. I said, well, yes, but it's not done the way I want it to be done. And he'll sit there and go like, I know what the thought bubble is. Then why did I have to do it if you would do it anyways, right? So that's part of the problem that we have, right? Part of our gender role expectations. We feel that we have to do certain things, childcare, home care, and all that in particular way. But if you put all that noise aside, I think fundamentally, the main issue is that the society that we live in continues to devalue domestic work. So domestic work is rendered invisible. That's why you're not paid for it, right? It's altruistic, kind of returns, and that in a capitalist economy, it's very detrimental. Then when you're trying to push for a fairer division of labor, because at the end of the day, the question then is, where is the work if you can't see it, and if you can't see it, if we can't remunerate it, then is it real work, right? So that's the fundamental problem I think domestic work suffers from, and therefore the men who step back from work, paid work, and invest in domestic work, suffer the same consequences, right? Many of them in focus groups interviews will tell us, that they have to give up on career advancements, they have to give up on that promotion, right? If they want to invest in family, and it's a personal choice. So then, I think, fundamentally, as we continue to push towards this, it's a values conversation, right, in our community. What can the market bear, so to speak? So I must remember not to lean forward. My intuition is always to lean forward and try to embrace you, and then my head becomes so big. Let me just try to sit back and say this in a more dignified manner. I think essentially for both men and women, right, what we are striving for is to have that option. If we choose to want to grow family, and if we choose to be an involved mom or an involved dad, that we must be given those options. And those options should come with tolerable individual opportunity costs. There will be opportunity costs, but it must be tolerable, right? And, if so question then is, this has been going on forever, and people can make their own decisions and make their own choices. Why do we have to push for fundamental change, right? Then my response is, we have to be careful, especially for a small place like Singapore, where all we have is human resource, because young Singaporeans have been making that choice. Just look at the singlehood statistics. Look at, the shrinking family sizes, and look at the growing proportion of those who still marry for love, but they choose to delay childbearing, and many end up, in the category we call DIGs. So when the choices are difficult, when individual cost is very, very high, then naturally, right, the young person with options will go where the rewards are. But then at what cost? If we continue to, allow market forces to take its course, then, in 100 years' time, maybe Singaporeans will be an archived word. There won't be any more of us left, because we will just become a graying, population, and then finally the last one will dissipate from the face of this earth. And with that, I will return the mic back to our gracious host. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. And Bryan, I'm going to ask you one question now. You talked about tolerable individual opportunity costs. Pauline, how would you define, or how would one in general define tolerable and intolerable?
Yeah. So basic fundamentals is, for a fair day's work, I must be able to take home a fair day's wage to grow my family, right? So I think there are several pieces of the puzzle that has to concur. First of all, I think that, this notion of overtime work and overwork should not be valorized. So if I don't know how it is with your officers, but certainly, all through my career, right, we continue to valorize overwork. We praise people who say, oh, I stayed up till 12 midnight last night, writing this piece of thing that nobody would ever read, okay? And then the next person says, oh, me too. And I remember I joined in that conversation. I said, yeah, me too. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh God, I'm not really lying. I was awake at 2 a.m. last night breastfeeding. But we don't have to, we can spare the audience the details, right? So there's this, concern that, we need to, to show and demonstrate that loyalty to our work, right? Means that we have to be willing to sacrifice personal time and use family time as surplus time. I think we have to stop encouraging that. So it's a long journey ahead, right? Because the reward system is tied to this, isn't it? Right? At the end of the day, there is a performance appraisal curve, right? Everybody wants to be an A. So how do you reward the A's? Is it fair that somebody who invests a significant amount of time in work be given the coveted prize? Of course it's fair, right? But the problem is, if those are the kinds of reward system that we continue to uphold and support, then of course everyone who can will try to strive for that A, right? So I think what we need to do is essentially turn off the lights. Employers don't like to hear this because it is about profit margins, right? But from my perspective, if you turn off the lights and everybody has to go home, then you have to go home, right? So you have to go home, you have to expand your social circle, you have to find a significant other, you need to find somebody who loves you, and then maybe get married, have children, go back home, be with your children, and so on and so forth, right? So these are just, I'm just simplifying the issue, but essentially it is, to have two things, going on concurrent. The first is, if I'm not going to overinvest in work, if I just do my fair share and work hard, and then I go home and work hard at home, the package that I bring home must be sufficient for me to raise my family, right? So that I can live with less, but I can still provide well for my family. And then the second is, from a macro perspective, ask ourselves as a community, as a nation, is it healthy for a young nation like Singapore to push our young, Singaporeans, in a way that causes them to overinvest in one and lets up, on the other? Because then the long-term consequences is not so good, right? I mean, it's like a slash and burn kind of economy, isn't it? You maximize profit right now because you're riding the growth curve, but then after that is over, and then you find that this very hardworking, group, right? They are now in their 40s, in their 50s, and it's too late for them, to start a family and so on. So these are the consequences. So do we want to then make it easier for young Singaporeans to make the right choices? I know it's a value-loaded system. It's a statement when I say make the right choices, but in case of choosing family, it's always the right choice. Oh, Bryan?
Yeah, I was going to add from two perspectives, at the individual and as a couple. So I think at the individual level, I feel that a lot of us need to be empowered to realize that we have a choice. We have a choice. And we know the consequences. So it's about having, that audacity to make a choice that might go against the grains of expectations from society, from family, from community, whatever that might be. But we have a choice. I have to say that in the last couple of years, I was fortunate to actually meet a lot of men who were probably at the pinnacle of their careers, who took a step back to spend time with the family because the family needs it. Whether the child requires a lot more attention at certain phases, whether the wife requires support, and some of them also struggle with caring for their own parents and in-laws. And they made that choice fully knowing that they're giving up living their careers at a peak and knowing that they will at some point have to find a way to get back on track. But they do it. And one thing I found consistent in those men is number one, they were secure in their identity. They were fully aware of the role that they have at home, in the workplace, in the community for some of them. And they know their influence over their children and over the people at work when they make such decisions, because it definitely shakes the culture and the mood in the places that they were living, and for a choice to tend to the family. But I find that to be not just inspiring but liberating for many of us. And increasingly we find more and more dads willing to make that choice to either stay home or to move back into the family business, or just just care for certain aspects of the community. The other thing that I found helped them is the affirmation and the support that they get from their spouses. And I found that to be really important, because none of them did this unilaterally without concurrence from their wives. And I found that the spousal support is the key thing, because at the end of it, whose expectations are we managing? Whose expectations are we trying to live up to? For me personally, and a lot of these men that I share about, we found that expectations of our kids, of our wives, have to be prioritized above any other expectations that we might get from society and all. I know it's easy to say that. It's not always. It's a challenge having to convince ourselves that as long as my wife, happy wife, happy life, my kids are happy, we're all fine, because we're still beset with the challenges of a livelihood and all. And in some of these cases, when a man take a step back, that's when our wives will have to go out and become the sole provider. And it's not always an easy decision to make for our wives, and even for we men ourselves, right? Because Pauline will know that many of us are pretty much defined by the name card that we have, right? Unfortunately, or the uniform that we wear. And it takes a while to really get out of this and to realize what's important, and to have that audacity to pursue our course of action, despite what the rest of society says. Yeah.
So Yun has posted a question, right? She asked, have studies been done in Singapore to see what kind of perceptions of discrimination stay-at-home dads face? Data elsewhere on how they face the most discrimination, or data elsewhere shows that they face the most discrimination and lower self-esteem. Yun, it's not just the men, right? I'm telling you, housewives is almost going to be an archived word amongst the younger generation. So it's not just the men, it's the women as well. If you are stay-home full-time parent, right? I think that there is a personal cost involved. It's not just having a one less paycheck, but you're right, because work doesn't just result in a paycheck. There's a lot of intrinsic rewards to being economically engaged, right? The sense of self-worth, you have your title, your position, and also important things like it is an avenue for you to expand your social network, right? To be able to, have to do activities for yourself, self-growth, self-fulfillment, and so forth. So it's not just the men who suffer and stay-home dads who suffer, it's also the stay-home moms, right? So in that sense, I hope that answers your question, Yun, because we know from the data that I play with, the proportion of the family types, right, where there is a full-time homemaker, male or female, is becoming, a minority, right? And the other thing that's important, Bryan, as you were speaking, there's something that we have not picked up on in society, and that is we are not dying. That's a good thing, huh? We are living much longer than we used to. So this means that at the end of the day, we shouldn't look at expendable labor as those who are between the ages of post-school, which is like maybe 20, 18 to 20, and then to like 55. No, we can continue to be very productive, right, all the way to, especially if you look after yourself, right, to 65 to 70 to 75. So in which case, might it not be wise for us to just take the foot off the pedal when they are in their 20s and 30s and allow them to pursue family? Because while medical science has allowed us and facilitated, longevity, right? I think the biological clock is still pretty much a real thing, isn't it? I'm speaking in a room full of, MBBS, so I must be very careful. But last I checked, there is a real biological clock for both men and women, right? So, ART and other and IVF, aside, natural procreation, takes place, at certain points in our life cycle. So might we not then, think about this and realize that if you free younger adults to pursue family interests and grow their children, at some point when that is done, they will be so happy to return to the workforce full time, and they will be the most undistracted and probably, wiser employees. Because after you have grown children, you are a lot smarter. You're a lot more tolerant, you have a lot more patience, and you have a longer, worldview perspective, right? So a lot of things that I think we have to, now is a good time for us to pause and rethink, because we've been running society using the same old traditional, model for the longest time. But society has changed, life expectation has changed, and aspirations, have shifted. So it is also time that we relook how work can complement family.
Okay, let me just jump in here. So thank you, Pauline, for picking up the questions. I want to remind everybody in the audience that, as you can kind of see, this is much more of a conversation that we'd like to have today. And so if you do have questions, if you have comments, please do put them into the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll pick those up and try to work those into the conversation here. We've covered a lot already, and I want to just sort of take a second. I really appreciate, Bryan, your perspectives on kind of the importance of identity and how that's been, just trying to understand what the drivers are, what the kind of prerequisites are that enable the second thing that you went to, which was the spousal support. And I don't see that as like you sort of emphasized more that in terms of the man stepping back, or like some of these career people stepping back, that it was really a spousal support. And I think that really the theme that I would draw from that is it goes in both directions, right? That there has to be strong support in both directions. So those two things. And I think, Pauline raises an extremely interesting idea about sort of rearranging what I think many societies call the prime working years, which do coincide with essentially what you're saying are the prime reproductive years as well, and the prime family years. So maybe we could just go back a little bit. And I think, to touch on some of these ideas where there has to be acceptable kind of choices, right? And I think partially that's society driven. I think partially that's, I think, Pauline, what you were sort of referring to is partially that's work driven. And, and sort of keeping with this theme that we have today of, both at work, at the workplace and at home, right? Maybe do you guys have any comments on how things might have changed when we all suddenly, as you mentioned, Pauline, we all suddenly started working from home? And so these things that were invisible before, right? These things where you could just physically leave and go to an office place, even if you weren't supporting, even if things were sort of not working so well at home, right? Now, those all become very, very real issues for productivity, right? And maybe we could start with Bryan, right? Have you seen that this has been a change in the calculation for maybe workplaces or for individuals trying to make that choice, struggling with, how much do I invest in one versus the other, or can I sort of find some happy medium?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always get confronted with is, the work-life balance, right? How do we find the balance? And I think in the past year and a half with this pandemic, many of us have started to realize that it's not really a balance that we're seeking. It's almost an integration. And And I say that with a bit of caution because I know Pauline mentioned about how would work complement family life. It's a different foundation. I mean, it's a different philosophy from how many of us try to complement work with our family life. It's like, who do you wrap? What do we use to wrap around what, right? So let me just talk on this integration first, because that's something that I found myself struggling with at the very beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly, both my wife and I, we were just trust at home. I mean, she spends a lot of time at home anyway because she's an entrepreneur. I spend a lot of time out there. So when I'm made to come back, that's when I realize possibilities started to open up to see how do I try to work from home. It's not an exact replica of really working from home, but trying to work. In my case, it was trying to work from home. And I know someone raised this question about how do employers manage this whole thing, right? How do we minimize the opportunity cost for our staff? We were presented or in fact, for me, I struggled with giving trust to the rest of my colleagues for them to work from home, because this is so unnatural. It's hard to evaluate, right? Or to apprise someone when you don't get to see them. And yes, in this pandemic, many of us have realized that working from home just simply means that we can't be as responsive as we want to be. We can't be as cohesive as we want to be. We can't be on top of many of the things that we do. So then what do we do? Right? Do we start to micromanage? Do we start to check on people? Do we start to put in a lot of rigid policies to ensure that they're really at home on at their phone, on their screen, on call all the time, right? Do we do that? And I think many of us, I mean, I believe many employers like myself started to realize that yes, first of all, we need to dig down into ourselves and to reevaluate what we mean by trust. What does trust mean to us? How do we reinforce trust at the work? How do we give it? How do we ensure that it doesn't get broken? How do we set the clear guidelines and boundaries for our people? How do we build a new culture within the workplace that allows people to try to work comfortably from home, try to be as productive as they can without feeling guilt or even shame? And how do I as an employer, right, ensure that I maintain that culture, create a safe bubble for my people to be able to work from home? So that's the first thing that it took a while to do. The next thing was really expectations. How do we manage the expectations of everyone? How do we manage expectations of their family? Because we know that many of us will know that it's a big struggle to actually try to work at home. I mean, I have 4 kids at home, and when the schools were closed, we had to really manage the time and how do I not degrade the attachments that my children have with me, or even my relationship with my wife, while I try to do work, right? There's only so many times I can tell my kids, please hold, I'm in a meeting, please hold, I'm in a meeting, without them realizing that work is more important than them, right? So I think many parents will have found very creative, innovative ways to ensure that the relationships at home are not threatened just because we have to find guidelines. And that's where we had to start teaching our kids to manage expectations, to let them have a understanding of the circumstance, so that they know why we do the things that we do. And whenever we hurt them, and that I do quite often during that time, that's where I just have to find humility within myself to apologize, to seek reconciliation, to restore the relationship, to regain and to build that trust once again, not just with my kids, but with my colleagues. Because my kids get to see me at work at home, so I've got to be the same Bryan over a Zoom meeting at work as I am at home to them, as a dad to my kids, as a husband to my wife, because they get to see me in all of this sphere, and it's got to be coherent. At the very beginning, it wasn't, but it took me some time to realize the importance of making sure that it's integrated, so that they don't grow up with the notion that you can be someone different here and someone different there and all. And more importantly, they need to realize that, it's okay not to be okay, because they see me break down, they see me go into a meltdown and all, they see me do weird things, and they need to see how I pull myself, how I claw out of the pits that I dug for myself, how I recover from it. Yeah, so I would say that, we have many good opportunities, despite the pandemic, to really show what it means to have to be an integrated self at work, at home, in the community, and also how we create that culture at home, and at the workplace, for the people that matters to us.
Thank
So
you.
I would say that, this allows us to focus on KPIs, right? I mean, it is about taking goal setting seriously. So all of us hate that moment in space, right? When we have to do, sit down and write out our goals. And right now is a season for appraiser, for the people I work with. So they all have to sit down and tell, and pen, what they have achieved in the past year. And then somewhere, in the beginning of the year, they have to sit down and pen. We all have to sit down and pen what we hope to achieve in the year ahead, right? And we don't take this exercise seriously, which is a pity, right? Because we think of it as a chore. And we do cut and paste from last year to this year, right? And then you go, oh, goal setting, what did I set last year? I'm going to cut and paste that, and then I'll send it up. That's very silly. Don't ever do that, because we've complained so much that most good HR officers have had to invest, right, in a very responsive, robust evaluation appraisal system. But it is only as good as the user's investment in that system. So I do think that this is a very good time for us, a good reminder for us, that because I read some of the questions in the chat, in the Q&A, how do we apprise ourselves? How many research papers do I have to generate? You cannot leave it to what the market can bear, right? In other words, one year you have this awful person who can publish 5 IR journals, in top tier, and then suddenly that's the yardstick that measures the rest of us. Do not allow that to happen. Right? Do not allow there are geniuses among us, but hopefully they're very rare, species, right? For normal people, right? What is a fair and acceptable deliverable? That should be the norm. And we deliver that because we want to be honest in our work. And then that's that. So, and again, I'm not very popular when I say this, but I also feel that we should not, we should not be over-rewarding, overachievers too much, because it does send the wrong message to the rest of us normal people, right? It sets very, very unrealistic goals that we cannot, reach without, I think, sacrificing ourselves, right, and our personal life. So if I can sum, I would say that the only way we can move forward on this is to shift the narrative of this kind of conversation. We are not talking only to parents with young children. We're talking to everyone. Whether you are married or single, you will have caregiving responsibilities. If not to a child, certainly to a parent. And most important, there is this very important element of self-care, right? So if we frame the narrative such that every single individual is invested in it, is an active stakeholder, then I hope that all of us will then say, well, we are the market, right? So therefore, we are not going to, kill ourselves over that bonus, that will buy me a new BMW or whatever. We're going to stand firm and say that this is acceptable in terms of how much I should work. And I have to put my family needs and my self needs first, because that's the whole principle in investment in human capital, isn't it? Because if you don't invest in me, how can then I deliver my best to you, my employer? But if you invest in me and look after my well-being, my sick leave will go down, my well-being will shoot up, I will live longer, and be more productive, right, in my outcome, and I'll be a nicer person to work with. So when I'm treated well, I will treat others a lot better. So that's the fundamental principle, I think. So it's, we do need to remind employers that, fundamentally you start with you're investing in human capital, right? And then the rest, then we are the human capital. So we cannot be silent. So every one of us here, 59 of us, right? Every one of the 59 people sitting in your various Zoom rooms, right? You have agency, which means you have a say, right? And you do, right? Do not believe that you don't have agency. If you are a researcher and you feel that our KPI should not, three IR journals a year is not achievable, but one good one and one, that is regional, that's perhaps achievable. And that should be, the KPIs, right? That you should be graded on.
Thank you, Pauline and Bryan. Earlier on, we spoke about trust versus suspicion, especially in the workplace, and how we work from home, and we need to empower people to be able to do that. There's another question on values. I've looked through several of them, and it's got the same theme. It's all about your comment on valorizing overwork, the time that you spend far more than you do investing in other things, either yourself or your family. How do we advise our audience or our young viewers to get ahead in life, be happy, achieve what they want to do, and yet not fall into that trap of overvaluing that, working too hard or too long or too much?
So maybe I'll start first. So work has to be fun, right? I mean, fundamentally, that is it. We have to make work, something that, helps with self-fulfillment. So that includes, I think, because now that technology is something that we need to leverage on. Mundane, work that can be optimized, that it should be optimized. Nobody should be a paper pusher, right? And just sealing envelopes, because where is your self-worth there, right? So whatever we can automate, we should automate. And then every single person who is in our office is a valuable person with agency, right? And somebody who can, who can contribute meaningfully, right, to advancing the mission of the office. So I think it's very important then for us to, just like we tell kids, right, to allay the fears of parents, so that they don't, now they cannot queue up, right? So it's virtual queues at all these elite schools. And so various ministers of education will say, every school is a good school, don't worry. I think at work, we also need to play up on that every skill is a valued skill, right? And how we value that skill then is to, I think, set proper goals and align them, with the the important outputs that are valorized by an organization. And then, have reasonable timelines, because my office is the happiest when people are able to do their work and still have that breather, to say hi to each other, to have a good break at lunch. They don't have to eat over their computers, and then to be able to go home by 6 o'clock latest, right? So I think these are important things that go towards, choice employments of the future. So that's the message that we keep trying to tell employers, right? If you want a happy employee, then you're going to get, one who is able to give you a lot more. And then we also tell them, we do research, on the millennials, and they tell us that they choose employers, and they're all these brilliant young minds, they choose employers based on how well they're treated. So therefore, in terms of your welfare benefits and your remuneration packages, work-life balance and respect for personal time and aspirations surely must be part, of that package. Sorry, Bryan, yours.
Thanks, Pauline. I was going to say that work or our careers are pretty much like a marathon, right? I mean, now that we are living much longer, many of us are working much longer because nobody wants to really retire that early, because what do we do then with the time? So So in the same like one thing I've come to realize running an organization, and I know of many other employers, is how do we recruit good people, how do we retain them? And more often than not, the decision sometimes is not just unilateral, it also comes from the family. So family engagement has become an increasing need for many corporations, because they find that if the work gets to a point when it's no longer, it takes the person away from the family, away from the marriage, at some point there's going to be some pressure, there's going to be some rationalization, and work has to give way to the family or to the marriage in most cases. In cases where it doesn't, it's unfortunate, then we find family or marriage dissolution, which is not entirely good for society too. And it sets the person, the employee, back a couple of years having to deal with relationship breakups, family breakups, and even legal issues and all, right? So there is a huge cost to society. There is a huge cost to the individual. There's a huge cost to the family, the children especially, right? So family engagement is something that is increasingly becoming has come to the forefront for many for the HR community, and they find that it's important to engage, to make sure that spousal support, family support continue to be given to the employee, and at the same time the employee has to be given enough, should be empowered enough to make decisions and to not be discriminated when they have to take time off to for any of the caregiving needs, right? And also ageism, right? Right now, I'm starting to also realize in many industries that the bar has been raised, and many policies have encouraged mid streamers. I call them the mid streamers, people who are coming back from time away from caring for the family, and even people who are looking for second and third careers beyond statutory retirement ages and all. And we know of many organizations that have started hiring people in their 70s, some in their 80s, and they do really good work. And that kind of got us thinking, like what Paulin was sharing about, what is work? How do we define work? How do we put it into our lives? How do we ensure that it is purposeful at every season? If we look at our life as seasons, we will start to realize that there are seasons in which the family comes forefront, right? So like I have young kids. I know that my captive years with them is probably the first 12 years. Beyond that, they'll start being attached to friends, to peers, and anybody else out in the world, so that they can validate everything that my wife and I say to them, right? And if there's congruence, good, our values stick. If there's dissonance, we hope that they'll find good adults or even ourselves to clarify those dissonance they have with regard to worldviews, values, and such, right? And beyond that, when my influence with them it's no longer there, then that's where many of us will start to find that we have for those with adult children, you find that we have so much more time to contribute towards whatever worthy causes, whatever life purposes that we want to pursue, whether it comes in the form of vocation, of a career, or whether it comes in many other forms, because there's so much to life than just being stuck at what we are at this particular juncture of our life cycle stage. Yeah.
All right, thank you both, Paulin and Bryan, for all these comments. And I think the discussion so far, if you take a look at some of the comments, and thank you everybody for submitting questions and comments. I think you guys have really touched on a lot of things that have resonated with the audience, especially in terms of what the rewards are, what the system is, and how we act within there. But I'd like to, I really like, Paulin, how you bring this up, that we all have agency, right? And we all can do our part. And I think the example of how on a generational time scale, the millennials have started to say, hey, these are the kinds of things, right? That's the kind of agency as a collective group, I think, that could really then start to make the big changes with what companies are looking at, which I think is sort of what you're a lot of what needs to happen is kind of the sort of social norms and values, and that may take some time, but it really does, if the millennials are changing the world, right? That's that kind of agency that I think you're referring to. So we are coming up, unfortunately, on time right now. So maybe just as an option, if we could just have some closing comments from both of you. Maybe we could start with Pauline, just a couple of minutes, sort of key takeaways, or if you want to expand on this idea of agency again. No, you're muted again.
Get so excited. Okay, there's a question from Yong, that talks about whether there's a place for legislation, right? And in all of this. I hesitate because the moment you have legislation, I think then employers spend too much time trying to beat it, right? And trying to, fight it. And it takes away, I think it does take away the energy, that should be needed, that's needed for collective, action. Right. So, persuasion is more sustainable, than legislation. I just wanted to spend my last minute talking to the amazing audience, because all of you are our frontline healthcare workers. Thank you so much. Right. While people like me could stay at home and ride out the pandemic and muse about the endemic, only because people like you were in the front line taking care of all of us. So I want to thank you. And I know that some of the things that we've talked about, like flexi work options and taking time off, it's not something that is easily accorded to frontline staff, especially during a pandemic. But I just, want to share two things with you. My mom was a nurse, right? And she was a nurse all the way till she retired at the young age of 55, right? In her generation. So she spent a lot of time away from home because she had to do shift work for the longest time. And I'm the only child. But I love my mom dearly because whatever time she had at home with me was precious time. So we would, steal, we didn't have much money, but we'd go steal a meal together. And I remember, going shopping with her, not buying much, but just being with her, right? And that was enough for me. And as Bryan said, times were hard sometimes, and I could see my mom was struggling, and it was very painful for me to see her struggle. But then, so I was always very, very, happy when mom was up in an uplifted mood, right? Then I have two kids. Yeah? I have two boys. They're grown up. One of them just left for UBC to do his graduate work, and the other one is holding court in the next room. He's a lawyer, right? So they're in their 20s, so 26. Today is Tim's birthday, so it's 26. And so, Bryan, I hate to tell you this, but our work actually begins when they're in their teens, because when they're little children, I am the center of their universe. I'm the queen, the everything, right? Because they have no one else. And suddenly when they become teenagers, I have to fight for their attention. And we fight because it's worthwhile, right? Yeah. And we invest. And now that they're young men, they're grown up and they're young men, I am very glad that my husband and I chose that pathway, because it was worth every hour that we spent with them, every night that we worried about them. It's just worth it because they've turned out to be really fine young men. So for those parents who are out there, it's not easy, but you will look back. So I'm 58. So I look back at my life, and there is, I do not wish to return to any point, in my earlier self, because what I have now is too good, to give up on, right? So have faith, keep praying, and hold on to each other, because that's what agency is. Agency is not being grumpy and standing outside to protest. Don't protest, okay, you go to jail. We hold on to each other. We hold hands, right? And we group together and we advance what we believe to be good for us and good for our organization and good for our country. And we will move forward because there's so many of us. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Pauline, for that heartfelt message with lots of humor, as usual. Bryan, would you like to say a few concluding words?
Yes, I would also like to extend my gratitude to all of you for taking the time out today, despite your task schedule. And many of you are on the front line, and I really appreciate whatever you're doing. So everything that we've talked about, like what Pauline shared, yes, are those things that we hope to be able to do. We know what's right and what we should be doing, but more often than not, in our various circumstances, we're unable to do that. And I just want to highlight that there should not be any shame, there should not be any guilt or even regret, even if we're unable to do any of this, because despite all that we're doing, when we fail to do what we hope to do, like what Pauline says, don't beat yourself up about it. We all have our circumstances, and we need to learn to be kind to ourselves. We need to learn to care for ourselves. More importantly, we need to learn to care for one another, because it is a community that we have here. I mean, many of us, if we look beyond our own homes, beyond ourselves, we find a community for support and also for accountability, right? I can only share with you today, and I have a good marriage today and 4 children only because community has decided to walk the journey with me, so that I do not give up on my family, so that I did not walk away from my marriage. And I think more importantly is because my wife had prayed so hard for men to actually start coming to my life to show me what masculinity really is. So it's really who I am today is really an outcome of a community who do not know me, but yet invested enough into me. And that's what every one of us have. We have this influence over so many other people. Whatever our actions, whatever we choose to do, whatever we choose to say, however we choose to act, will make an impact on the people around us, not just within ourselves. And how I choose to live my life today, and how I choose to love the mother of my children, will have an impact on my children, because my 4 children are going to grow up having the blueprints to what marriage should be, having the blueprints to what parenting should be. And at the very least, I will hope that their friends will get to see this, to see at least an example of what of how families can thrive despite all the circumstances that we are in. And I know that we are in pretty hard circumstances in many cases, right? Yeah, so do what we can and know that we are never alone on this journey. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Bryan. Really, I want to thank both of you, Pauline and Bryan. This session today, we touched on a lot of different topics. There are a lot of original ideas, I think, that came up, potentially some long-term and in the future. I think it really resonated with our audience. And I myself, and hopefully I speak for Melina and the rest of the audience, found it actually very inspiring and empowering. And thank you both for drawing from your experience and perspectives, and being willing to open up about some of the personal experiences that you've had to sort of drive that inspiration. So thank you very much. I'd also like to echo the thanks to our audience. Thank you for taking the time to spend this hour with us. Normally in non-COVID times, we would be trying to feed you a lunch. And so, this is a lunch and learn, but this is how COVID is these days. On behalf of NUHS WISH and the NUS EOCD, and Melina and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. And please look out for the announcements for the next lunch and learn that will be happening next quarter. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Take care and enjoy. Have fun at work, whether it's at home or in the workplace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.